Thank you very much. I was just commenting to Rogelio that while I was in graduate school here in the 70s, I ran out of money, and the scholarship that I had to attend graduate school was insufficient. I was living in Eagle Heights, and we were my wife, we had two children, and a third one was on the way. And then my wife said, "Do you think you got enough education to get a good job?" And I says, "Why?" "Well, I'm pregnant again, so I better start working." So my first job was at MATC. I was in graduate school, and I taught downtown. I have the most wonderful memories of my time at MATC and with students, and I just love the campus and the diversity of the student, and you reflect the same kind of student body that I had when I taught. And by the way, I never recovered with my experience at MATC because my second job, my full-time job, was at MATC in Milwaukee, and I spent 20 years there. So you can tell how much I'm attached to your endeavors. The topic is three generations of migrant workers dash the Salas family, but it's much more than just about the Salas family, and you'll find out that it has to do with the people that accompanied us throughout the three generations of the endeavor that my family went through. We're going to begin with my grandfather, and my grandfather was born during the Civil War. That's Lincoln. This is 1860s, and the early settlement. This is, there are two maps that I'm going to show here. This is a map of Texas. It is in the 1840s because basically this was the map that my grandfather followed. This used to be attached to Texas. You can see that Coahuila, the state of Coahuila, Mexico, the northern state of Coahuila, was attached, but it becomes separated in 1836 when Texas declares its independence from Mexico with a little help from the southern plantation owners that wanted this piece of property to be a slave-owning state. So you can see some of the old trails actually become the new highways. And they provide the routes and the trails for my grandfather to move up and down this. This, if you follow, this is Highway 35, Interstate 35, that goes all the way up to the Red River Valley in the Dakotas and in Minnesota. My grandfather came from this region here. His parents came from the Torreon, Durango area, so he spent his childhood here. My grandmother comes from one of the Native American communal villages that are here. Now, if this was a tropical map, you'd see that almost half of the state of Coahuila is mountainous. It's one of the richest states in Mexico, rich in ore, rich in gold and silver. But anyway, my grandfather travels to here, crosses into Piedras Negras. The border town on this side of the border is Eagle Pass, Texas. So he crosses into Piedras Negras and into Eagle Pass in 1906. Now, what attracted him there? Artesian water. This is a semi-arid land, and land speculators. When I'm talking about speculators, I'm talking about tracts of 10,000 acres or more. And these land speculators found water, so all they needed was cheap labor. So they started recruiting Mexicans from across the border in the state of Coahuila. This is my grandmother. You can see by her Native American features that she comes from the region. We call them Coahuiltecas by the name of the state of Coahuila. But actually, they're a very diverse group of Native American tribes. She never had her picture taken. I don't know if you ever heard this idea that you lose something when your picture is taken. So she always avoided having the picture taken. So here somebody is across the street with a telescopic lens. I'm walking out with my grandmother. She's been, me acaba de dar la bendición. She's saying goodbye to me, and this is me walking out, and that's the only picture that we have of her. This is my other grandmother. By the way, my grandmother on my father's side was born in 1875. So she joins my grandfather in 1906, and they settle in this community called Crystal City. We don't know where my mother's mother comes from. My grandmother Rita, you can tell the difference between her and my grandfather's mother. What is the difference? Well, first of all, it's the complexion. Okay, one of the phenomena about this region is it used to be the area where my grandfather settled. It used to be the winter home of the Comanches. Okay, and the Comanches, of course, come all the way from northern Arkansas and Oklahoma and dominated all of the state of Texas in the early 19th century. And as they migrated, the Comanches migrated from north to south to seek their winter home. Runaway slaves used to tag along with them, and they used to shelter them. So there are communities throughout southern Texas and northern Mexico that look like my grandmother. That is, that are Afro-Mexicanos, all right? And that's my beautiful grandmother there. She was abandoned right after she was born. So we don't know anything about her parents. And we think that it has to do with her beautiful complexion. This is the region that they settled. And this is 4 counties in the state of Texas. Now this is a huge area. The county, this Frio County, Dimmitt County, Savannah County, which is the red one where I was born, and then LaSalle. And with now you have cheap labor, you have water, all you needed was a railroad spur. When that was built in the second century of the 20th century, second decade of the 20th century, now they could ship vegetables all over North America because they had access to the railroad. And so this region became the winter garden region because they could produce vegetables when no one else could because of their temperature. Now look at when my grandfather comes here in 1906. You're talking about only scores of families that are coming in to populate that area. But by 1930, they go from less than 800 folks to over 10,000, and all of the 4 county regions have that dramatic demographic change. Now, some of it, the Mexican Revolution, when does it start? Around 1910. So some of the population is not only because of the recruitment by these land speculators, but people are fleeing Mexico because of the chaos and of the Mexican Revolution. You'll notice that the migration, that the population stabilizes for the next 3 decades. And a lot of it has to do with the out-migration. And one of the reasons why there is oh, by the way, I included this image of Popeye because the area that we come from produces a lot of spinach. And they contacted the creator of the Popeye caricature, and they asked him if they could use him since Crystal City, Texas, my birthplace, is the spinach capital of the world. So you'll see images of Popeye all over my community. This one happens to be right in front of City Hall. So home of Popeye, my old hometown, Crystal City, Texas. Well, all of the massive amount of population, there's no home for them. In my neighborhood, there were still buildings that were made out of adobe, and of course, I don't even call this a home. I call it a shelter because it's made of just discarded material. But that's where a lot of these recently arrived immigrants that were coming to this area and living in these makeshift shelters in Crystal City. By the way, you can actually see photos of my community in the 1930s. The Farmer Service Administration sent a photographer to my hometown, to the county of Zavala, and they have pictures. And I included only 2 of them. This one and this other one of this woman and child in a dirt floor, heated by mesquite coals. And the reason I included this because that was my job in the early 1950s in my grandmother's home. We didn't have a dirt floor, we actually had a wooden floor, but we used to fill the tub with sand. And then the mesquite coals would be burned outside, and then we would bring them in, and that was how we would provide heat. I was too young to bring in the coals from the mesquite bonfire outside. My older brothers did that. My job was to empty the ceniza, the ashes from the mesquite. So this type of heat continued until the 50s and early 60s in my neighborhood in Crystal City. Well, what ended this whole scheme that my grandfather had developed for the 2 decades that he spent in Crystal City was the Great Depression, right? The Depression abrogated the relationship that he had as a sharecropper. He thought that by coming into the Winter Garden area and sharecropping that he would have access to the land. But during the Great Depression, everybody lost access to that. So this is where the first migration starts. And here we have what President Trump calls bad hombres, right? They're the scapegoats of the 1930s, and they're being deported. And the word repatriation is a misnomer, just like what's going on right now here in Dane County and throughout the state of Wisconsin. All of the children that are being deported are native born. So repatriation means being sent back to your country of origin. The country of origin was the United States, but over 60% of the people that were deported were American citizens, and this family appears to have some difficulty with their vehicle as they're traveling back to Mexico. By the way, these are INS pictures. This is a file of the deportations, or the repatriation that the United States Immigration Services has. Now, it's a little bit of our schizophrenic immigration policy then as it is now, because what happens during a couple years later in the Second World War? We have millions of our young men and women in uniform, and there's a labor shortage. So now we're going to Mexico and we develop a treaty, and we say we want laborers to come in and run the industrial plants throughout the United States because we have a labor shortage. So here we see that they're actually being brought in by train, and the border is open for them to come in because there is a labor shortage. By the way, there's more immigrants, these are Mexican nationals that come in after the war when the economy is booming than there is during the war itself. Between 1959 and 1962, there's over 400,000 nationals that are coming in yearly to the United States to work in our factories. These are legal immigrants. Now, what happens? Many of them stay, or patterns get established. They develop relationships with their peers here, and they start developing communities as far as Chicago, Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to read something about the Broceros, there's a University of Wisconsin professor by the name of Armando Ibarra, who is president teaching there, that wrote a book on Ernesto Galarza, who worked all his life trying to end the Bracero program. Why would you want to end the Bracero program? Well, all of these hundreds of thousands of Mexican nationals that are coming in are depressing the wages of Native American farm workers like my father and individuals from Crystal City that are forced to migrate from the Winter Garden region up to the Great Lakes region. And of course they're cheap labor, and they're great for strike breaking, right? And to stop the organization of the farm workers here in this country. So two things that occur besides the poor working conditions and wages in our hometown. The other is Jim Crow and apartheid. Texas, as I told you, in 1836 was the sympathizers were the plantation owners. They wanted Texas to be part of the southern plantation system and the exploitation of slaves. So just like the former Confederate states, in order to deprive African Americans of their rights, passed Jim Crow laws, poll taxes. So did Texas. Texas passed poll taxes to deprive these Mexican communities from their rights and the right to vote, and they developed a segregated school system. So this is a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War in my hometown. You'd think that only individuals in Europe ended up in concentration camps. Well, what to do with a concentration camp in Crystal City, Texas, after the Second World War? Make it into an all-Mexican school, right? This is my elementary school. The towers and the barbed wire is gone, but it still felt like a concentration camp. This is the first 5 years of schooling that I got in Crystal City under the system of segregation. Well, my father says, we're going to get out of here, we're going to start migrating. This is the second generation, and where are we going to go? Well, before my grandfather passes, he shows my father how to get to the Great Lakes region. So, if you notice here, this is one of the great migrations. By the way, by the time we got out of the migrant stream, and I spent 10 years as a migrant worker, there were over 100,000 migrants coming in from South Central Texas to the Great Lake regions. 15,000 of them used to come here to the state of Wisconsin. And you could see we could go straight up Highway 35 up into the Red River Valley to Hohe and Thin Sugar Beet. We'd stop here in Illinois and do the cutting asparagus. We'd later go do hoeing and thinning sugar beets in Hartford, Wisconsin. Later the cucumber harvest in late summer. Then the tomato harvest here in the lower Great Lakes region. We'd stop on the way upper Mississippi Delta. We'd take the early cotton harvest and then the late cotton harvest in the Panhandle. It'd be about an 8-month endeavor. This is my mom and dad. It was Sheriff County Fair. It was a great event. We yearly looked at it. You can see the motif. You know those places where you go in and they pull the curtain, 25 cents, and you get 3 of these pictures. And that's around 1958. We're still harvesting cucumbers there. And this is my brothers and I. I come from a family of 6. Can you tell which who is me? This is the oldest, the second oldest, and I'm the third oldest. I'm the third one up on top. And this is around the time that we started migrating from when I was 7 until I was 16 years old. This is the major means of transportation, 2.5-ton tandem trucks. Now this image was taken in the valley by David Giffey. By the way, David Giffey was a classmate of mine when I graduated from high school and attended Oscar State. He comes from an old Irish community right outside of Fond du Lac, he quit his job as a photojournalist after he got back from Vietnam, joined the farm workers movement. So you're going to see David Giffey's name over all these early pictures because he lived through this period. He later joined the Texas Farm Workers Movement. This picture is taken in the Texas Valley. And you can see it was taken around wintertime. You can tell by the people shivering on their way to work. My dad used to build these walls here in the truck and then put a canvas top for the 1,500-mile trip to the Great Lakes region. The other means of transportation was a pickup truck. This was primarily for individual families or extended families, and you can see the little camper that this family made for the family. Hoeing and thinning, this is before planters became guided by lasers, and we had to actually hoe and thin in this case I think these are cucumbers. Yeah, these are cucumbers. Now, you saw the picture of my brothers and I. We were not strong enough of our upper body to handle the long stem hoe, right? So my dad used to cut the hoe about 18 inches so that then we would use this kind of motion to get rid of the cucumber plants and the toxic weeds that used to grow. Well, we nurtured, the farm workers nurtured the crop from seed all the way up to the harvest. This is my wife's family. These are 6 of her brothers. She comes from a family of 12, and here they're harvesting cucumbers in central Wisconsin. This is my father-in-law, Jose Garcia, in the back, bending over, and then my brothers-in-law harvesting cucumbers. I'm going to show you 3 different pictures of the migrant labor camps. This was a migrant labor camp in the 60s. You can imagine, now this is very tightly painted, and there used to be common sanitary facilities here for everyone, but they're very small. I come from a family of 6 with mom and dad. You can imagine putting 8 people in that one room, or with my wife's family of 12, with their mom and dad trying to put 14 people in those units. And so overcrowded conditions, in spite of the fact that Wisconsin had a housing code. In the Mississippi, when we harvested cotton, there was no housing codes. We had to stop harvesting cotton because we actually had to live out our vehicles. But here the problem was, in this particular type of camp, was overcrowded. It just made everything bad. Now the worst migrant camps were the ones that were removed from the city where nobody would see them, where basically it was just these units with tar paper, and you can see the more isolated labor camps were the ones in the worst conditions. I lived in this migrant camp. By the way, this is a hemp plant in Hartford. Now, don't tell anybody, but we grow great cannabis here in the state of Wisconsin. When the Department of Defense wanted to do something about the rope for the Navy, it did a study and found out that plant grows very well here in the state of Wisconsin. So it encouraged farmers, and they built about 6 of these hemp plant mills to grow cannabis. And the reason they're so high, 3-4 stories high, because they used to hang the plant. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't want to talk too much about that, but they grow 8 to 10 feet long, and you dry it, right? And these were drying plants, and then they used to separate it for the fibers. But one of the great things about living at the hemp plant in Hartford, Wisconsin in the early 50s was this was an industrial plant. It had hot water. The only problem, and so we could take showers after work. The only problem is no privacy. There was no roof. They just built 8 by 10 plywood separations around all the walls of this building, and no roof, right? So we knew the most intimate details from our neighbors, because plywood doesn't really shield anyone from anything. But I had never been naked in front of my brothers, and here we were taking showers with workers that we didn't know anything about. Anyway, that's a hemp mill plant in Hartford, Wisconsin. One of the reasons I was eventually able to graduate from high school is everywhere we went, my dad used to put me in school, like it or not. And here I am in Henry, Illinois. We're picking asparagus, and I had attended 3 years of that, and I graduated from Henry, Illinois grade school. Now, at that time, they took all boys and all girls school. Isn't that odd? So here I am. These are all the boys in 8th grade in 1957. And I don't have to tell you which you can tell what's that. Anyway, we relocated. My dad said, that's enough. I went to 3 different high schools when I was a freshman. So my dad said, that's enough. We're going to relocate in Watoma in 1959. And that was almost the first strike. Nobody wanted to stay up here. Look at the winter. The first year, he bought a restaurant. The reason we got hold of this restaurant is Mrs. Kitzer, the owner of this restaurant that we leased in 1959 when we relocated, committed suicide in the kitchen, and nobody locally wanted to get into that place where here comes some Mexicans. They opened up a restaurant, so we replaced Mrs. Kitzer's her specialty was homemade pies. They still had that sign up there when we took over the restaurant. That's my dad. We had a horrible experience that first year with the snow. Nobody had any clothes for it. And of course, I was active in activities, extracurricular activities. I was had the opportunity to play in 2 championship teams, and I was the only Mexican in the football team and in the whole conference. So the thing was, get the Mexican, right? But this guy over here, the coach, was real kind to me. He made sure that all the other football players protected me and kept me from harm. But anyway, it was a lot of fun playing for 2 championship teams. So I'm waiting on tables in 1961, and these people from Madison come over and says, "Oh, you're the Salas, you used to be a migrant worker?" I said, "Yeah. Would like to recruit some children? We're opening up a daycare program." And sure. So not only did I recruit them, but I did everything except drive the bus. So here I was sheltering these kids that I had recruited for the first daycare program. Well, after the War on Poverty and the Elementary and Secondary Act, these programs expanded. So 1962, 63, and 64, I was going to school in the fall, and then in the summer working with these expanding migrant programs. But what is happening? 2 things that are happening is I'm going back into the labor camps, now no longer as a worker. I'm a recruiter for daycare programs. The people are coming up to me and say, "Oh, look at the conditions that we're living in. Look, somebody got hurt. Look, we didn't get paid for such and such." So we start saying, what are we going to do about all these worker complaints? Plus, there's another thing happening. In my hometown, there's a political revolt. We're one of the first communities in the state of Texas that actually does something with the franchise. And up until 1963, the 85% of the Mexicanos there had never had an elected official. So in 1963, there was a political revolt, and we took over the city council. So now I'm going back to Texas during the 60s, getting involved because my uncle's running for office, my father's brother. And so if you want to know something about our community, Professor Chockley from the University of Wisconsin here writes a book, Chicano Revolt in a South Texas town, if you want to know. Now, we're all products of our homes, right? Remember I told you that in order to deprive the majority of the Mexicanos in Crystal City, they passed this poll taxes. My grandfather paid his poll taxes. I found this in my grandmother's things. He paid his poll taxes in 1915, 16, 17, 18, 19. I don't know who he voted for or if he voted, but we did find the poll taxes. Now, this was $1.75, which is over $15 right now. So this was a ton of money in order to get the right to vote. And so did my mom and dad. This is the 50s. Now, Professor Chockley says that the revolt didn't happen until 1963, but my grandfather and my mom and dad were paying the poll taxes long before the political revolt. So we're going back to Crystal City to get it. Here I am. I'm in Crystal City, Texas. So we're organizing farm workers here, doing something about their complaints, and I'm going down to Texas, and here I'm showing the folks at this placita, this little plaza, who to vote for. So I'm crossing out all the names that they shouldn't vote for, and leaving the ones that they should vote for. And every time that I would cross out a name, people would just honk their horns in there. So now we want to do something about their working conditions here in the state of Wisconsin, so I called up Cesar Chavez. I was in Madison, somebody brought a newspaper and says, "Hey, you used to be a farm worker." I said, "Yeah, well, you know what the farm workers are doing in California? They're protesting their working and living conditions, marching from Delano to Sacramento." And so I got the paper, I said, "Who's that?" "Cesar Chavez." So I got on the phone. And this is when you actually had operators at the other end of the phone system, right? Person-to-person call, Francisco Chavez. Yeah, I want to do what you guys are doing. Can we use the farm workers' flag, the Thunderbird symbol? He says, yeah. He says, we're in a great boycott now. We're in a fight with the grape growers. And I got a organizer in Chicago. I'll send that person to see if he is helpful to this. This is my first meeting with Cesar. We met at the end of the March. So we're calling for a mass meeting, but as after our experience in Crystal City, where the people, they call it Texas Rangers, they kicked our tails for voting, I was afraid what was going to happen to the workers. So we're calling a rally to protest for marching from Watoma 80 miles to Madison. Well, we don't want to put a date on the thing. We don't want to, because we just want a dialogue to start. So we say, let's get together to be recognized. Let's speak to be heard. Our people have a cause. And everybody's buzzing. What does that mean? Where are they going to meet? But word of mouth, right? Since this is the only way we could do it without endangering the safety of the workers or prevent them from being fired. Because once they got fired, they not only lost their jobs, they lost their homes. The homes used to be provided by the growers and the processors, so we're real concerned about that. This is the first rally that we had. Here we say we only want one worker per family and one family per labor camp, because the labor camps are spread all over central Wisconsin, and so they start coming up to the county courthouse steps to plan, and we have several dozen individuals, mostly young, marching. Here we are starting the march, and there we got a makeshift image of the farm worker symbol, the Thunderbird symbol that we put together, and of course Virgen de Guadalupe, and our whole Juntarnos para Ser Oídos. Father Michael Garrigan in the back, and we begin the 80-mile march. At the end of the march, people are all excited. We should get together and do something about the potato industry. So we start walking to the potato industry, organize a strike, not knowing exactly what was going on. And I feel bad to this day, because we actually had the workers sign, the majority of the workers. We had an advantage over the California farm workers in that they didn't have a right to organize. We had a right to organize here in the state. We thought that by the mere fact that we had the majority of the workers, that the grower was going to recognize us. But he started getting affidavits, signing affidavits, forcing the workers to sign affidavits that if they belonged to the union, he was going to fire them. So he starts firing our workers and that. So we called a strike, and of course we couldn't keep the strike. The hearing wasn't set up until December to consider whether the employer, by forcing us to sign affidavits whether we belong to the union or not, was an unfair labor practice, and we couldn't keep the workers out until December. So we broke up the strike after several weeks and said, this is the last time we do anything like that. We got to use the law with more intelligently. So we got ourselves, we didn't even have a place, the first strike, we didn't even have a place to meet. Now in 1967, we had a place to meet. We called ourselves Obreros Unidos. Now, Obreros Unidos, those of you that know about Spanish, the word Obreros comes from the word obra. Okay? We didn't like the word campesino as it was being used in California, because we didn't have that notion of the feudal notion that you have with campo, campesino, peasant, etc. Trabajador would have been a good translation of worker, because you can translate. But we wanted to talk about the union being obreros, because they actually produce something of value. We nurtured the plant, as I showed you earlier, from the seed all the way up to the crop. So we called ourselves Obreros Unidos. And here we published a newspaper. David Giffey quit his job. That photographer that I showed you his name earlier. These are great pictures there when the kids barefooted. By the way, there were so many Mexicans coming in to shop in Watoma. They actually showed Mexican films in the Down Theater during the summer. Here are paper boys selling La Voz Mexicana. By the way, we sold the newspaper. This is the whole notion of building a self-sustaining organization. we wouldn't even imagine giving away the newspaper. We wanted to raise money for the union, so we sold the newspaper. Chavez calls me up and he says, "Hey, Teatro Campesino is on a tour throughout the United States, raising money for the union during our strike. Can you accommodate the Teatro Campesino?" And this is the old guerrilla theater, you know. You put a tag, you're a grower. You put a tag, you're the church. You put a tag, you're the scab, you know. And so we said, I know the place exactly where we can have this performance. In Madison, in the Grand Hall there, the Union and the Memorial Union. I said, but if we have the performance there, can they come to Watoma and perform in front of migrant workers? So here they're performing in front of a migrant crowd after performing at Madison, and that's the reason why it is with the Mexican hat in the back, and of course he was involved in a whole bunch of Chicano films of the 70s and 80s. The kids just love the migrant kids. They started acting in the labor camps, and everywhere we went. Now we used to do skits, and we used to have music in our rallies, and that as a result of this experience. So I called it huelga in art because of what happens at our rallies afterwards. We start having all these kids at the Teatro Campesino. And of course we couldn't organize because we couldn't go into the labor camps. They belonged to the growers and processors. So we used to call baseball games. We have the one labor camp play against the other one, but in fact what we were doing, we were organizing workers because we couldn't get into the labor camps and endanger their stay there. So hundreds of farm workers would come to them and would pass out union buttons and union information at these events. We also started the first health clinic. And again, this whole notion of mutual aid societies, that was the only organization that we were allowed to form during apartheid in Texas. And so we started saying the role of the union is to have the workers help themselves, and health was one of the major needs of our community. So we started that. This is before legal aid. I came to Milwaukee, and Lloyd Barbie, Assemblyman Lloyd Barbie, and African-American leader who desegregated the Milwaukee public school system, and Fred Kessler helped me develop a group of lawyers. And they used to drive from Milwaukee to provide legal services. This is Michael McCann when he was a youngster, right out of law school, and he later became Milwaukee County District Attorney for 30 years. Here he's volunteering, providing legal services to our union members. And of course we joined the Great Boycott. And then I love this picture because this is John Wilcox, a grower who later became state assembly person, and who later was appointed by Tommy Thompson to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, buying grapes, breaking the picket line and taunting the grape growers, just to show you his sympathies, or lack thereof, of our farm workers movement. This is our first strike, Libby, McNeil, and Libby. We started going after the multinationals, and this is in 1967. We organized 700 workers, and here this is a strike. Now, we're not going to go out and strike like we did in the potato industry the previous year, because we didn't know what to do with the workers got fired. What are we going to do with all these hundreds of workers? So we do a walkout and then come back to work while we were petitioning the state to give us an election. And they gave us an election, and we won it 405 to 8. The first union election here in the state, but Libby, McNeil, and Libby wouldn't negotiate with us. They moved their operations out of state rather than negotiate a union. So we said, all right, we're going to go and organize all the processing plants in Libby, McNeil, and Libby. So we had walkouts in Janesville, in Hartford, Wisconsin, and in Jackson at the Libby's plant. And here, now again, we didn't want to endanger the workers at their plant, so this we would do it during the noon hour. This is the noon hour at the Hartford, Wisconsin, that same place that I lived at the ham plant in support of our union. And then we opened up a gasoline co-op as one of the services that we wanted the migrant workers, because they could get, as members, they could get the gas cheap, cheaper, and they could all repair their vehicles here before trekking south. This woman and her family, by John Wilcox, a guy that later became a Wisconsin Supreme Court member, fired his family for wearing a union button. So we put a tent in the middle of the city of Wautoma and housed her family there, and started having rallies to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. So here she's talking about the right of farm workers to belong to the union and to wear the union button if they so choose. And these are the families that are supporting it. We also are asking all the local grocery stores in the Waushara County area in central Wisconsin to support the grape strike. This particular one in downtown Wautoma didn't do so. So we spent the rest of the summer boycotting it, and he lost his business that fall because they depended so much on the farm workers. This is the center of that championship football team that I showed you, Bob Leeds. He was the center and I played right guard. All of the relationships that I had built up during my stay at Wautoma High School were lost once I started standing up for the migrant workers. And this is Tommy Thompson. You can see he was our center for our basketball team. So they're all out there taunting us, trying to see if they could pick a fight with us. Anyway, Cesar Chavez finds out all this difficulty that we're having with the unions here, and we're winning the elections, and we got the workers organized, but we can't get a contract. So he says, Jesus, why don't you help me full time with the Great Boycott? And once we win in California, I'll help you in Wisconsin. And I don't know why I believed him, but I believed him. Now, nobody knew at the time that the Great Boycott was going to take 5 years before we got the first contract. But anyway, at that time, we split the operations of the union. I went down, moved to Milwaukee. So here's a old farm boy coming from a small community of Crystal City, coming into a community in Milwaukee. And what has been going on in Milwaukee during this period of time? 200 days of marching for open housing by the African American community. So this is John Maurice. He and I had met earlier, and he gives us a little office space in behalf of the back of the Archdiocese funded office to set up the Great Boycott, and he allows us to use the church to inform the Latino community at Mass to support the Great Boycott. What an extraordinary guy, huh? And this is Cesar Chavez. He visits Milwaukee very early on, and there's Father Maurice in the back, my brother Manuel, and I'm taking the picture, so I'm not on it. And while we're there, of course, we had just lost that strike that I was telling you about with over 500 workers. So they're looking for me, and this is, I told you not to come up to Wisconsin because we had lost the strike. So UMass has now been funded as a result of all this agitation that we have in the field, United Migrant Opportunity Services. So I go and knock on the door and I says, hey, UMass, you guys got money for assisting migrant workers, and I got all these people that lost their jobs because of the strike. Oh, no, we can't get involved in your fights with the growers. We're going to lose the grant. So what do? We take over the agency, okay? And this is one of the first meetings. We take over the board, and the 5 non-Latino administrators resign rather than deal with us. And so I said, what did I do? I come here to organize a Great Boycott. I get involved with the Afro-American community and their effort. You know, I get into a fight with UMass. Now we don't have any administrators. So I applied for the job, and I become the first Latino director of the United Migrant Opportunity Services. Well, we started the same mutual aid society notion that we got. We're starting a health clinic, started getting the Spanish Center, Father Maurice resigns. We didn't force it, no, he resigns. We get a Latino to be hired. We go after the employment and service training, and we got a Latino hired there. So within a year's period of time, we have 4 of the major Latino agencies in the near south side of Milwaukee, all run by Latinos. And UMass is the central activity. This is one of our annual meetings. We have the first Latino candidate, Dante Navarro, there in the middle, to run for office. So just like we did down in Crystal City, we're doing voter registration and education and running candidates in the 70s in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Pat Lucy gets elected governor of the state of Wisconsin. He visits Milwaukee, and we're giving him a tour of the Latino community and the needs of the Latino community in the state of Wisconsin. He sets up a migrant task force, and by the way, we codify a lot of the things that we did, demands that we had in the late 60s and early 70s. We actually got them codified and into statute in the state of Wisconsin, where workers couldn't just, the employers couldn't just simply go into Texas and over-recruit. They had to have a contract and say, how many workers do you need? Do you have housing for them? Are your housing being inspected and certified, that kind of thing? So these are hearings that we have to pass a statute to codify the migrant demands that we have. Well, during the welfare marches, by the way, the Republican-led legislature at the time, in 1969 through 72, thinks that all these Mexicans and all these Afro-Americans that are coming to Milwaukee are coming up here because of our welfare benefits, are more generous than they are in Mississippi or in Illinois. Well, of course, the reason we came up to Wisconsin was not to be on welfare. We came up here to work. So they start reviewing and changing the welfare laws in order to stop what they call this African Americans and Latinos coming up here taking advantage of the welfare. So during the welfare marches, Ernesto Chacon and Jose Puente get arrested. So these are demonstrations that we're having to free Chacon. And by the way, we secure a pardon for Ernesto Chacon from Governor Lucy, who I had showed you. So now we got control of all these agencies, right, in the South Side. But you have to have degrees in order to take advantage of the administrative positions. We can't begin our bilingual programs because we don't have any certified teachers. So we petitioned the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee for access. Now, when I first go to Oshkosh State in 1961, out of 3,000 students, only my brother and I are the only Mexicans there, and about the same number of African Americans on the campus. When I enrolled at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee at 68, because that idea of staying in school and getting a degree that my father had inculcated in me never stopped. So everywhere I went, no matter where I was organized, I enrolled in school. By the way, it took me 10 years to get a bachelor's degree. But anyway, this is about the 8th year of that effort. And I applied to the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and out of 25,000 students, all the Latinos could sit around one table. Okay? So we started trying to establish what we call the Spanish-Speaking Outreach Institute, and here we're picketing. And by the way, civil disobedience, arrest, etc., was the only way that we were able to achieve the establishment of this program. So here we are after the takeover of the Chancellor's office at UW Milwaukee. And by the way, after this, they did establish the SSI, now called the Roberto Hernandez Center. And here we're having a rally to talk about the planning. And this is something for some of you gals here. We have this massive community meeting. We're celebrating the establishment of the Spanish-Speaking Outreach Institute. So we're planning at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. These Latina women are marching up to the podium, and here I am at the top of the podium, and they get up there and say, "We're not going to take this crap from you guys anymore. So what's going on? He said, well, all you macho guys, at that time, Latinas weren't it was a custom that they were allowed, but it was a custom that they couldn't go into the bars in the south side of Milwaukee. Only male Chicanos, right, could go in there. So we'd get up the next morning, we could be ready for the next morning, and the gals would say, you got it all planned for us, haven't you? What are you talking about? Well, since you guys get in there after the demonstration and that, you decide what we're going to do. So the next day you come in and say, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And we're not going to take this crap anymore from you. Either you be fair with what is going on is the beginning of the Latina women's movement. And they want to make sure that from now on, any activity that we have, any planning that they have, equal access to this meeting, and they let us know by this demonstration. And we're all surprised what's going on. Anyway, the part of the activity, of course, is the Fiestas Patrias. We want the Milwaukee public school system, which is being desegregated at the time, to recognize our holidays, our Cinco de Mayo and el 16 de Septiembre, bilingual education, etc. And of course, there's no response from them. So we start conducting student walkouts, and you can see, I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of students are walking out of and at the time this is going on, the Milwaukee school systems are being desegregated, so the bilingual program is part of this negotiations. And what do we do after we walk up? Have a party, right? Yeah, and speakers, skits and whatever. So this is the beginning of Mexican Fiesta. All right, this is the first celebrations. Now, since the 20s, since Mexicans have been in the city of Milwaukee, they've celebrated the Independence Day. But we start putting the politics of desegregation, bilingual education, the takeover of the agency in the South Side, all tied in with the fiestas, because we have fiestas after all those demonstrations. So, meanwhile, back at the farm, I'm back at the University of Madison. Been accepted in the PhD program. I passed my qualifying exam, and we're petitioning the University for Chicano Studies, and they said there's no money for it. So meanwhile, with all these years that we've been working with the legislators on migrant issues, since there's no money, I'll tell you what we'll do. We went to the legislature and we amended the University of Wisconsin budget. Were they pissed? They couldn't believe that we were able to do that. We put $50,000 and we put a line item for Chicano studies. And they still wouldn't. It took us 10 years. They wouldn't apply, they wouldn't use that money for academic programs. They use it for recruitment, they use it for academic support, but they wouldn't. It wasn't until the 1990s that they actually started offering Chicano studies like our line item in the University of Wisconsin budget started. But these are the first meetings that we had, and these are the demonstrations that we had at the University of Wisconsin to establish workshops that we had. This is during the Reagan. Of course, he's the Contra War in Central America. This adds to the diversity of the Latino community. It used to be just Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans. And now, as a result of the wars in Central America, we start for the first time seeing Latinos coming from that region, fleeing that chaos that these Contra Wars began at the time. And it's still going on. We have over 10,000 unaccompanied children being held in detention camps right now as a result of that chaos that continued by our support of these dictatorships that we began during the Reagan period of time. And of course, continuing with politics and fiestas, we brought Fiesta Mexicana to Milwaukee, to Madison. At that time, there were no Mexican restaurants. We used to go to the Presbyterian church. What was the basement that we used to have the taco dinners?
Yeah, Friday.
On Fridays, yeah. We used to make a ton of money. We had, Mencha at the time, had over $3,000 in their kitty as a result of all these activities that we used to do, because people loved the tacos, and of course we would attend national conference and we'd bring the Avila brothers, who eventually did that. They said it hadn't been for Mencha, we would have never had bought the initial uniforms to establish all these dance groups. Remember those manifestations in the Milwaukee public school systems and the fiestas we used to have after those manifestations? In 2015, over 80,000 people attended Fiesta Mexicana, and it was bigger this last year. So remember those takeover of the United Migrant Opportunity Services? This is Rodriguez, who is the son-in-law of Cesar Chavez, at the 50th anniversary of UMass, coming to thank the farm workers at UMass for helping them during the great boycott. If you want to know a little bit more about this activity, Professor Simon Rodriguez has written that book, The Tejano Diaspora. So that is 3 generations of migrant workers and a whole bunch of other people that Now we made it in time. I don't know how much time. We don't have very much time, but I'll take some questions or comments if you have. Yes.
Just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
You pointed and said Tommy Thompson. Are we talking about like Governor Tommy Thompson?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
In reference to what? Excuse me.
Oh, it was the Wauwatosa counter. It was a protest picture, but it was.
It's a different topic.
We like race.
Oh, we like race. Well, no, that was the governor that named the grower that was breaking the Great Boy Scout picket line. He named him to the Supreme Court, to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That was a Tommy Thompson. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I can't tell you, it's really a pleasure. I have all these fun memories. I used to walk just right down State Street to teach at MATC while they were building this campus, and really enjoy it. And I said I never recovered. I had spent 20. There were no jobs. I applied for a job at MATC here. So I don't know what would have happened if there had been a job. But anyway, there was a job at MATC in Milwaukee. So I didn't have any money on credit. The students that I taught, I used to meet with them when we were on food stamps over at the lines. Remember the work programs that Thompson established? But anyway, for the first 6 months, I took the Badger bus to go and teach at MATC, and then finally, after 6 months, got enough credit to be able to get a loan for a car. And gee, I was king of the road then, getting a job. But anyway, I want to wish you the greatest of endeavors in whatever you do. I know that you're just tremendous. I know the 2 years that I was here were just such a wonderful experience teaching you guys. Yeah.
It's helpful to me to listen to your story and listen to just the struggles and the fight and the persistence and determination. What do you tell us, employees and students that are here, because it continues? I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
We're not done.
We're not done. We were just talking about the raids that have been going on in the last several days. We're talking about those Central American children, primarily unaccompanied minors. Over 10,000 of them are in detention centers. The splitting up of those youngsters from their families in order to create a fear to stop them from migrating. Matter of fact, Trump just sent it at the United Nations, as if that's going to do, and of course they all laughed at him, But as if that was going to do, hey, you migrants, you stay where you are. Well, you stay where you are, you get shot or you starve to death. You're not going to stay where you are. We couldn't stay where we are and suffer under apartheid. And that's why we came up here to the Great Lakes region. And we came here to fight. We didn't come here just to work. So the fight continues. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.